Praise the Lord. Good afternoon, brothers. I don't know what time it is when you're watching this video. Could be morning, could be afternoon, could be even evening. Whatever time it is, the Lord be with you. This week, welcome to week 9. We're closing in on the end of things. And this week, we're beginning the famed Canons of Dort. As I mentioned in the beginning of this course, I accept all of these canons and all of the confessions and all that stuff, but I accept them as reliable witnesses to what was taught at a certain period in time. That's why I've said to you that the canons and the confessions are the beginning of thinking, not the end of thinking, that they were each written at a certain time and for a certain purpose to answer certain questions at the time, and they're all written with a certain slant to them, and that's okay, because that's what you would expect. Well, this week we begin the famed Canons of Dort. And what I'm going to do, instead of doing a lecture myself, because we're looking this week at things like God's right to condemn all people, sources of faith, God's eternal decree, election, single decree of election, election not based on foreseen faith, election based in God's good pleasure, the first head of doctrine. We're going to be looking at how the Reformed faith has historically looked at those things, and that's fine. Calvin, one of our Reformed fathers, had a certain view of that, and that's okay. I don't know that that is the early church view. So you're going to be reading, in your reading this week, the Canons of Dort, and you're going to be reading how the doctrine of election was received by the folks at the time of the Canon of Dort. So I'm not going to go through that with you, and remember that when you're asked questions, answer according to whatever canon you're being asked about. So that if you're asked about election, answer in terms of Dort. If you're asked about one of the Heidelberg question, always answer in with respect to whatever confession or creed you're being questioned upon when it comes to your examination verbally before PIM, okay? But what I'd like to do, since you're going to go through the reading of the first head of doctrine, I have to tell you, I respect the Canons of Dort. I respect John Calvin's take on them, but I in no way think that that's the early church view. I think that's Calvin's take. That type of election is Calvin's take on election. The early church had a totally different idea of what election was. So what I'd like to provide for you, since we're reading the Canons of Dort, I would like to provide for you another way to look at election. Because I got to tell you, as one of the early Jesus freaks from 1970, right? 1971, 72, 73. Somebody told me, we were members of a street ministry. We regularly ministered to heroin addicts and all kinds of addicts and pimps and prostitutes. So here's a guy on the street and he's shooting up. You're not going to come to that guy and say, hey, rejoice, you could be one of the elect. That's not going to help him to stop taking drugs. What is going to help him is if you say to him something like, God has forgiven you and Jesus is risen and Jesus will deliver you. So we're going to look at this whole aspect of election two ways. The first way is with your reading, which is what you would be tested on in PIM. But that does tend to be heavy and does tend to be fatalistic. I've got to tell you, the early church did not start with the same premise that the Canons of Dort do, that God has a right to condemn everybody. It's not the early church view. That's not the view of the doctrine of election, which was handed down by the apostles. So I want to provide for you an alternate way to look at this whole concept of election. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, let's face it, the canons of Dort, it says, with reference to election, can give great comfort. Well, I suppose you can. I suppose that's true to a degree, but not so much if you're not one of the elect. So it can cause a real dampening of spirits. I have to be honest with you. When we discussed this in seminary, it just was it wasn't an enjoyable thing at all. So I'm going to provide for you in the body of the email that you'll get this week, beneath two links. One to this video that you're watching right now. Secondly, the second video will be a link to a discussion, a lecture, a podcast of Father Thomas Hopko, who's of blessed memory. He was an Eastern Orthodox priest. He was the dean of St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. The Eastern Orthodox have retained the original Christian teaching on practically everything, most especially this area. So I would like to expose you to that, because it's so hopeful and it's so balanced. So I'm going to provide both of those links. Watch this video first. This video is not even going to be 10 minutes long, because the other one is about 45 minutes long, and I don't want you to have to watch 2 hours of teaching. So for this week, read your readings, read the Canons of Dort, take aspirin if you have to, read Brother Plantinga, and listen to the video by Father Hopko, and then answer the question. Remember that election is meant to spur us to God. It's meant to open up our hearts to the Lord. And that's what we're looking for here. Not just truth, but truth that will sanctify us, truth that will bring us in contact with God. So, brothers, I hope that you enjoy this. It's not a video by Father Hopko. It is a podcast that he did about predestination, election, and prayer, and providence and prayer. So let me know what you think. I'm looking forward to reading your papers. You're all doing so good. So good. All right, dear brothers, then we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.